To the Orange Water and Sewer Authority Board of Directors work session this Thursday, December 4th, 2017. I'd like to note that Rushia Vora is absent this evening, one of our board members. Does any board member know of a conflict of interest or potential conflict of interest with respect to any item on the agenda tonight? I see none. John, can you give us an update on the December 5th Natural Resources and Technical Service meeting?
Thank you. Board members Ray, DeBose, and Yinka Ayankoa. And our first topic was biogas to energy. The committee and the other board members who participate are recommending to the board that OWASA should not invest money right now for consultants for the design and detailed study of a biogas to energy option, and that recommendation will be presented to the entire board when we review the energy management plan in February 2018. We do endorse basically continuing the track that we're on, which is part one of that is about half of our biogas we use as a fuel source in the boilers at the wastewater treatment plant to heat the solids digesters. And also continuing on, the second part of it is to continue on exploring interest levels with our partners and seeing if something can emerge from our association with those partners. So the important thing to note is for the board when we discuss in February, if adopted, this recommendation means we will not achieve one of the goals that's in our energy management plan. Specifically, the goal was to beneficially reuse all wastewater treatment plant biogas by the end of calendar year 2022, provided that the preferred strategy is projected to have a positive payback within the expected useful life of the required equipment. And the part that we're not going to meet is the year 2002. I think if we basically put this on the shelf for much longer, we essentially rule out the possibility that we would have something implemented by that year. So we've looked at about a half dozen alternatives, combined heat and power, which involves using an engine to generate electricity, converting the biogas to vehicle fuel, or processing the biogas and pushing it back into the natural gas pipeline for the community, and various alternatives with all that where we might actually collect other organic waste from the community to combine with our own. And in all of those, as you can see, that there requires a committed partner to be involved, and that's the piece that's lacking from the puzzle right now, and why we don't believe it's worthwhile to fund this consultant work to try to get ahead on a game plan that we're not sure is the one we would adopt. So that's a recommendation there. The second topic was drought planning, and when we get to the agenda planning item on tonight's agenda, the staff and committee unanimously recommend that the board approve the committee to continue working with staff to improve the drought response operating protocol, otherwise known as DROP, which if the committee continues its work would eventually lead to a new draft for the full board to consider adopting. That current drop was adopted in January 2013 by the board. And there's also a document, just for awareness, there's something called the Water Shortage Response Plan, which is a formal document that we are required to submit to the state. So these two documents these two plans or protocols work in concert with each other, and they specify the actions OWASA will take as our reservoir levels decline. So specifically, the item of interest that we want to cover on the drop is the idea that we won't touch our Jordan Lake allocation until we get to what's called a stage 1 water shortage. And since we adopted the original plan, we've been informed by research from Dr. Greg Shiraklis at UNC about the benefits of sort of regional collaboration and water transfers to improve the resiliency not only of our own system but the entire region system. And currently that restriction in the drop might be something we want to revisit with that in mind. So I also think as we continue that work, it's useful for all of the board to get visibility into this sort of drought protocols that we have. And I'm not sure that, you know, with the natural turnover of the board, that we're all as familiar with that I think would be beneficial. Sorry for the long update. Wanted to keep us all together on that. Thank you.
Sure. Oh, you good? Okay. So the Human Resources Committee met on Thursday, November 16th, to discuss and evaluate alternative compensation strategies for employee performance rating period of October 1st, 2017 through September 30th, 2018. We also discussed retiree health benefits for new hires, deferred compensation, 457 plan. Our committee's recommendation on alternative compensation strategies is included in item number 4 of tonight's agenda for discussion. And we also decided that we will continue the discussion on the retiree health benefits for new hires and the deferred compensation 457 plan. We'll discuss that when we meet again. So that was it.
Mm-hmm. Do any other board members have announcements that they want to make? John?
I just wanted to make a brief comment on forestry management on our lands that are primarily out near Cane Creek. Yinka and Ray and I took a tour of the mitigation tract recently. Ruth Rouse guided us, and we had a very nice trip out there. And you know, we learned a lot, and the basic issue was that the land out there has been treated in various ways over the years, and a lot of the land out there is has too many small trees that are too close together, so they're not growing properly. In other areas, there's a lot of storm blowdown that can be a fire hazard. In some areas, we have undesirable species that have come to prominence, and we don't have the oaks and hickories that are good for wildlife food and habitat. So anyway, the OWASA Forestry is carrying out a plan to get that forest back to more healthy conditions and better for wildlife. And the reason I wanted to mention this, I was just looking at a Nature Conservancy publication, and the Nature Conservancy has a big project underway in western North Carolina wanting to do exactly the same kind of forest improvements on public lands that we are trying to do on our lands. And so I think this reassures us that we are, you know, we're headed in the same direction as the Nature Conservancy. And I think when we get around to expanding our forestry management activities to other lands other than the mitigation tract, we'll get a lot of support from the Nature Conservancy and people who think that way, that this is the right thing to do. Thank you.
Okay, we'll now move on to the consent agenda. Is there any board member who would like to pull an item from the consent agenda? Okay. There are 3 sets of minutes on the consent agenda. The minutes from October 26th for the Board of Directors meeting, and then there was also that same night a closed session for the purpose of discussing a personnel item. And then there's the minutes of November 9th work session. You have a motion to approve?
No.
Heather's first,
Second.
Second by Barbara. Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, say aye or nay. All right, thank you. I'll get that right sometime. Okay, the next item on number 4 is to discuss the compensation strategies for employee performance rating period October 1st, 2017 through September 30th, 2018 and future years. Stephanie Glasgow.
Thank you so much. Based on the board's previous discussions, a successful employee should reach the midpoint of their salary range in approximately 7 to 9 years. To achieve this, the merit portion should be no less than 2.9% more than the cost of labor portion. After those discussions, the board requested that the HR committee meet to discuss strategies for awarding pay increases. The committee met in October and in November and discussed their desire to make better use of the rating category since needs improvement and unsuccessful are used sparingly. The committee preferred an option that provided an increase for 3 of the 4 rating categories. So in your packet tonight, the options reviewed by the committee are located on page 4.3. The committee is recommending option 3 for the following reasons. It provides an increase for those top 3 performance categories. It provides employees in the top 3 categories with an increase of at least 2.9% above the cost of labor. And it increases the percentage of employees eligible to receive a performance rating higher than meets expectations from 15% to 35%. What the committee discussed was 10% for the top category of exceptional and 25% for exceeds expectation. And this way the board can control setting the maximum dollar investment each year while making sure employees who are meeting the expectations of their position are compensated fairly and within market. And yes, ma'am.
So how would we do that if we adopt this? Would the board essentially be able to control the budget impact simply by what we set COLA at? Would that be the only decision that the board made?
The board, yes, the board would set the COLA amount, but it could also set the 3 increase amounts.
Okay, so the total salary adjustment would just be for next year?
It would be for the current year that we are
current year.
in.
Okay, but not for, it would not bind board members after this current year.
John?
I had a question in the same area, and I appreciate that this is an example that would be applied to this year. It's not necessarily locking us into these percentages every year. But I know our current policy says, for example, exceptional employees get 2 times the merit increase of the achieved, successful. So I'm confused. I remember at the committee meeting, or my recollection is I heard this maximum dollar investment approach mentioned, but I don't know that the committee really got into that discussion. I don't think, to my knowledge, that we really endorsed it nor rejected it. So I'm just confused about how that aspect of it works. Does it replace the exceptional as 2 times the achieves?
Yes.
It does.
It does. If you see in your packet, I provided some suggested language to change the pay administration guidelines.
I didn't see the part crossed out. Wherever in our policy it says it's 2 times. That's somewhere in our policy, right?
It is. It's in the second paragraph. The very last sentence is crossed
Okay.
out.
There, sure it is. Yeah. Okay. I don't know if I'd like this maximum investment dollar approach. I mean, maybe you or Ed could describe why that's sort of the recommendation versus, the old approach with this new tier, or maybe another committee member.
Yeah, I was going to say, Barbara or any of the other committee members want to answer John's question. Can you repeat the question, John?
My question is this concept of maximum dollar investment. Very end of the meeting, I don't think there was a lot of how that works relative, how exactly that works. Yeah, I generally support option 3, but there is recommendation, isn't it? Yes, it's the final sentence of the recommendation.
Oh, human,
Policy, I think, is
increases the percentage?
the board can control setting the maximum dollar
right.
investment each year while making sure all employees.
What, like clarification?
I don't know exactly how that works. Maybe it's really simple. I just would, potentially confusing enough that I'd like us to all be on the same page as to what that means.
Okay, Steve, can you,
Well, because my question is if we're taking out any of the guidelines around double between bottom and the top in terms of, or then, yeah, if we set a dollar amount, how does that get?
Yeah.
Like, I'm with John, I don't understand the process would actually look.
Yeah, I think that reference is not that you would say, okay, salary increases are limited to $400,000 or whatever. It's by the fact that we've got a limit on that 10% can get exceptional, 25 can, use the wrong term. 10 can, yeah, that's right. 10% get exceptional, but another 25% can get the next. That prohibits us from going hog wild and putting everybody in as exceptional. So in that way, you control the maximum dollar amount. You set the percentages, 1%, 3%, whatever they are, that's shown in there. And by nature of the fact that only certain people can achieve the exceptional, certain number of people can achieve the exceeds expectations, you're controlling the dollar amount there. I don't think this is meant to imply that you would say $400,000 is the amount. Does that make sense? Maybe that's not necessary to be added in there, but
Well, I think it's it's pointing out the confusion because, I mean, it sort of implies that we simply say the budget is this and we're going to set COLA at this and then the rest ripples. There's another approach that would be COLA is this and we're going to allow 10% and 15% and merit is this and merit for exceptional is this. You tell us what the budget is going to be for that.
yeah.
But that's how you would set it.
Okay, well, I'm not sure the policy kind of,
Captures that.
So we're saying, exceptional up to 10%.
Yeah.
Meets up to,
No,
there's no
that's
for,
the amount. It would be
exceeds, I'm sorry, exceeds up to 25%.
25, so it's a total of 35%.
does that satisfy your question, John? or-
So you,
I think I understand it. I think
as to whether you agree with this.
I'm not sure I like the way it's, the way it's written makes that clear. And that's, I'm trying to think how I would recommend changing that maybe. In other words, let's say we all go with option 3. I'm talking out loud, and anyone can jump in and help me bail it out. But that essentially we're going to define what those percentages are for each of the 4 levels, plus the merit percentages, plus the cost of labor.
Right, as in
And we're-
previous years.
And we're going to look for the 3% merit for the achieve. That's sort of one of our policies. Is that written in there?
2.9% above the
2.9.
cost of labor. And I think that statement is just to say that, if you read the paragraph above it, that by setting that 10%, that 25%, that's the cost containment.
Right, but it doesn't need to be in our policy that the policy itself lets us control the budget. You know, that to me, that's just causing confusion.
Yeah, I
Would
think
you
you
like
could
to
strike
remove
that
that
sentence.
last paragraph?
I don't, right.
I would disagree. I think that the percentages, the 10% and the 25% should be in the policy.
No, I'm agreeing
It's in
100%
there.
with you.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm agreeing with that. And what I'm saying is this approach that we can manage our budget,
Oh, yeah.
that one sentence, yeah. And so, and just to follow up, so you're also proposing that we eliminate this exceptional is 2 times the merit as sort of a standard, that now we are more flexible with that year to year?
Yeah.
I personally would prefer to keep that there as kind of a stake for us. And one last thing, I would support, if other board members support, I would support the top two tiers being 15% of the population and 25%, just adding 5% to that top group to total 40%. It's not a big deal to me, but I would welcome any other board members to join me with that.
Isn't that what we did this past year? We made the top 15%?
Yeah, not to exceed 15.
Yeah, we gave a little bit more flexibility. Any other discussion?
John, what's your rationale for changing the percentage scheme? The instinct, what's the?
Yeah, from the committee meeting, I was an advocate for not having the top two groups exceed 50% because I thought that would be more difficult to manage from a manager's point of view. And basically goes back to 15% being where we've been in the past and 25% sort of basically splitting our achieves into two groups, one that's 25 and one that's 40. I'm not changing the 25, I'm just changing that top. It's not nothing, that's why I say I can't argue for it strongly, but I would welcome others that go along with that.
Well, I think that it's an interesting question. I don't know if Stephanie, if we left the top one at 50, if we lower the top one, does that send a message to the staff? Well, now we have fewer possible acceptable employees as opposed to sort of splitting the group below into, I don't know.
I think this past year was the first year and only year that we did the 15%. Prior to that, it was 10%. And we discussed giving the executive director some flexibility, and they said, well, let's just make it 15%. Ed?
And whether we increase the number of employees that can earn through performance higher than the standard merit increase from the current 15 to whether that's 35 or 40, I mean, certainly the staff would be fine with that. And in the option 3, it is following the practice where the merit for exceptional is twice the merit for meets expectations. And the new category we added of exceeds expectations, it's 1.5 times the merit for that category. So, I mean, we like the concept of allowing a greater percentage of our employees to earn through their performance higher than the standard, which allows those employees to move even at a faster pace than the 7 to 9 years. But it still provides, the majority of employees who are successful in their jobs that meets expectations, they too can get to their midpoint in that 7 to 9 years window.
Is there some reason, Stephanie, that we didn't write into the policy that we keep the 2% merit, 2 times merit for exceptional and 1.5 for exceeds? I mean, is there some reason that was taken out as opposed to making that the standard practice? Because that's what we did this year, and that's what I would like to see continue.
The 2 times merit.
Well, and then the
1.5.
exceeds expectations be 1.5, right? So is there some reason that was taken out or not addressed?
I think it was just flexibility for the board.
Okay.
But if the board is comfortable establishing that, I know we would be, totally fine with that. That's the practice, and of course the board each year has the authority based on whatever he decides important to adjust that. But I think making that, our practice and our commitment to the employees to the extent that conditions allow it, I think that would be an improvement to what we presented.
Jeff?
At the risk of wandering down this rat hole again, I'm a little I'm concerned. The resolution is written that the increase above cost of labor for meets expectations is 2.9, as written right now in the resolution. So if we resolve that that's 2.9, right? And then the next group is 1.5 times that, and the next group 2 times that. Now, of course, then we never have to have this conversation again. There are no decisions for the board. And I'm concerned about that lack of flexibility. I mean, it's been, it may continue for a long time that cost of labor will remain around 1%, in which case we could probably work this for a long time. But I think we're setting up a future board for a difficult situation. You know, inflation may return, right? And cost of labor might be 4%, and the board's not going to very likely be unable to follow this very inflexible policy at that time. So I don't like putting in that many firm numbers. I just don't think it reflects what decisions might need to be made in the future. So,
My understanding is the cost of living adjustment is a decision the board will make each year, and that there's nothing in the policy that dictates it's 1%. So if labor rates are increasing rapidly, right, isn't that the way you policy to read? So that it could be a 4% labor adjustment, and then we'd have on top of that the 2.9%, the double
right,
and whatnot.
that's my point.
Yeah. Oh, I thought you sounded like you were concerned about inflexibility with the cost of labor because of inflation and so forth.
Well, yeah, I mean, if the cost of labor, if the cost of labor went up to 4%, 5%, and we bring our meets expectations people 1 plus 2.9.
No. I think the way the system works, if I understand it, and that's why I keep looking at Stephanie, is if the cost of labor is increasing at 4%, then our meets expectation folks would get 4 plus 2.9, so they would get 6.9.
Correct, and keep going, and
Okay.
then the numbers get higher and higher. I'm just saying, I'm not sure that OWASA would be able to do that.
Oh, okay.
And I think I don't think that the board and the staff can just abdicate our responsibility to manage pay administration into an absolute formula. Things change. The world is an unpredictable place, and we have to do our jobs.
Kevin?
So my concern on that is actually writing the 2.9% into it. For that reason.
Yeah, I agree. I feel like you could do one or the other, but once there's too many constraints, then it's just a formula, and you could easily come up with, instead of just saying 398,000, it would be 700,000, and that might not be something that we could manage in our budget.
Because, I mean, basically what we're saying with this policy is even if cost of labor is 0, everybody is getting a minimum 3% raise every single year. And according, now, Stephanie, tell me if I'm reading this right, but that to me is a decision that the board would not make any more decisions on.
The 2.9%?
Yes, so it would be even if we say cost of labor increase is 0, everybody would be getting at least a 3% increase in their salary based on this policy. Is that correct?
Yeah.
So the board would have 0 opportunity for taking account of economic conditions that would make it so that we wouldn't want to do at least that. So it's not just a goal, it's everybody's getting at least a 3% annual raise.
That's correct. That's in the first paragraph of the
Which
pay
I
administration.
think limits flexibility.
Right.
What this is. This is a policy, not a law.
Mhm.
It's not written in stone.
Okay.
There's nothing in the policy, and certainly nothing in the resolution that suggests that this board has the authority or intent to bind future boards if circumstances make this an untenable policy. So long as the future boards find that the policy works, would be applied. But there's no reason to presume that it's immutable because this board has adopted.
But it still sets an expectation of the employees.
Well, fair enough. I'm just want to be sure I was.
John?
Well, I think there's one thing we could certainly add to this document said, something like economic conditions permitting, the board shall annually, or not shall, that's too strong a word, would consider adopting this, blah, blah, blah. So we could soften that a little bit and give the board flexibility. I don't think this means we don't approve a plan every year, to Bob's statement that we would review it. But I think you know, going back to why we took up this topic is that concern about employees getting to the midpoint in 7 to 9 years. And if that's the principle that we all believe in, the math comes out to, given the width of our pay ranges, you know, within a job grade, that it has to be the 2.9 a year. And so that's why that's built in here. And so I'm just going back to that original principle. If we want to not make a statement about that principle or sort of want to be flexible with that principle, then I think we're in a different ballgame.
It seemed to me that we certainly could add a sentence to this that says that the board would annually revisit this question, but this is the direction that we hope that we can maintain.
I mean, okay, but do we really need to do that considering the reason why we started this in the first place? That's what we need to keep our eyes on. We don't want to do anything that's going to, you know, start any type of regression from what we're trying to do for the employees.
Good point.
I completely agree with that. I'm not trying to back away from that goal. I'm just, to me, it just seems like, you know, this should, I like this policy. I like these raises. I wish to continue. This seemed to be too firmly written in stone. And what we, in our past policy, had fewer restrictions than this. And we were unable, during my tenure, to follow fewer rules. Now we have more. It just seems to me like it's too rigid in the way it's written. Although I'm happy to approve this whenever we come around to vote for it, and year after year. It's just
right.
You know, maybe it's
Seems like to me we're mixing goals. One goal is to get people below the midpoint up to the midpoint, and the other goal is to give people who are performing well reasonable increases.
Right.
So should we have two separate policies? I don't have an answer to that question, but a policy for the people below the midpoint and then a separate performance policy.
I think they have to go together because it doesn't make sense to do two different performance reviews or have employees graded differently if they're below versus above, just because of skill sets, in my opinion. I think you have to have it together.
But that's not what the policy is saying. The policy is saying if you're below the midpoint, you deserve a 2.9% raise regardless of your performance as long as you meet expectations.
No, that's everybody. That's everybody gets the 2.9%.
I thought that was below the midpoint.
No, that just is what is designed to get people below the midpoint to the midpoint. But everybody gets it, regardless of where you are in the pay range.
Because the pay range gets adjusted by that amount.
The pay
Well,
range
by
gets
the
adjusted by
co-
the cost of labor.
Just the cost of labor, excuse me. All right, any more discussion? John, do you want, since you stirred this bowl, do you want to make an amendment?
I guess I'll make a motion. Well, I guess I would motion that, well, I think there's two paths we could take. One is to say, let's rewrite the policy and let the board take another look at that new version. If we don't want to do that, I would suggest the following, that we adopt the resolution subject to these changes, that when we strike the last paragraph that was proposed, and
On the bottom of page 4.5.
on the bottom on page 4.5, thank you, that we and that we reinsert the exceptional twice. This is my resolution, right? That we reinsert this last sentence in the second paragraph, and it states that the exceptional ratings should receive a percent increase twice the level of the successful merit increase. Yes, and we're talking only about the merit increase component, not the cost of labor adjustment. And then finally, since this is my motion, but anyone is free to make changes, I'll suggest that we change the allocation to 15% exceptional rather than 10%. Yeah, 15 and 25.
John, it makes sense to add the middle percentage too, like, one, yeah,
Sure, that'd be okay. Yeah, that'd be good, probably good to clarify that. And then, if I didn't say it already, I would recommend that our council or whoever help us write this in a way that's clear that we're going to be, making this decision each and every year with these as guidelines.
well, it seems like if we're making all those changes, we might want to have it come back to the board. Does anybody have any suggestions or friendly amendments to offer to John?
Second.
Okay. Okay, so we got a motion and a second. Any discussion about that? And the motion would be to give the staff to redraft and bring back John's amendments.
I'm making the motion to adopt it with those changes. That's
Okay.
the motion I made.
Okay,
I think that's what Heather seconded, but we should check
Okay.
with her.
all right, that's clarification.
And since there are a number of changes, we can email the board our proposed, how we captured your conversation, and in the event you think that wasn't captured, we could put that on the agenda for the next meeting. Bob and Stephanie, would that work? If you're comfortable acting tonight,
That's more efficient.
With a little practice, I think I can restate it more clearly.
Yeah,
The other four
I guess,
changes.
even though I had expressed some concerns about the rigidity, I think we're close. I think people agree on the goal. I can get over my rigidity concerns. My recommendation is that we don't defer, that John restate his resolution to make sure that all understand, and that we have a second on the table and that we vote. That's my preference.
Okay,
So there are four, it's adopting the resolution with four changes. One is to strike the last paragraph in attachment 1 on 4.5, which is related to the maximum dollar investment thing.
Maybe we should pause. Everybody good on that one?
yes.
The second, before I forget, is for our council or other staff members to craft the language of the pay administration guideline to make it clear that the board is making a decision each year, and these are guidelines rather than, a locked-in policy. The third change is to specify that Meet Successful or Successful will have a 2.9 merit increase as sort of our guideline, that
meets expectations.
meets expectations, yeah. Exceeds expectations would be 1.5 times 2.9%.
The merit.
Merit. It's the merit component plus COLA, yeah. So the merit part would be 1.5 times the 2.9%. And for exceptional, it would be 2 times the 2.9% as a merit increase on top of the cost of labor increase. And the fourth change is to change the number of employees that qualify for each of these performance ratings to 20% for exceptional.
You misspoke. You
I'm
misspoke.
sorry, I scanned to the wrong place. Thank you. Thank you.
We're listening, John, we're listening.
That's a good sign. 15% exceptional, 20%,
25.
okay, 25, thank you. And remaining with 40? Show me the page.
Yeah, we don't need to specify that.
Yeah. Sorry for that, I fumbled that one.
Okay, any questions? Ed, do you have a question?
Yeah, just a clarification. It seems you're leading in the first paragraph that have no increases no less than 2.9%. I think the right terminology would be 1.5 times the merit. For exceeds expectations. For exceptional, it's 2 times merit rather than, because it could be higher than that, it doesn't have
Yes.
to be, so.
I think that'd be a better way to say it, that 1.5 merit, 2 times merit, And that merit sort of baseline is 2.9%.
Right, yeah, which is,
Which is then, that was going to be my comment, how that language changes now in keeping with the fact that it's not 2.9 in this proposal for this year, it's 3.
Right.
And that language now fits.
Yeah, that's right. That's much better.
I have a question. So, just to clarify, John, if you're looking at 4.5, are you talking about the second paragraph or the first paragraph, to make changes at?
Well, when I originally described it, I was talking about, well, first of all, I said the last paragraph, that one sentence, this
Okay.
approach allows the board to control the maximum dollar investment, blah, blah, blah. I'm suggesting we eliminate that. I think we agreed that that really has no effect.
I think was your third.
And the other change I was saying is in that second paragraph, there's the sentence that was crossed out at the end. It is recommended that employees receiving exceptional ratings should receive a % increase of at least twice the level of increase for successful rating. Basically, my motion is to replace that with this table that says meets expectations, gets the merit increase, exceeds expectation, gets 1.5 times the merit increase, exceptional gets 2 times the merit increase. All those increases are on top of whatever cost of labor increase is implemented.
Answer your question. Okay. Any other questions or comments? Okay, we have a motion on the floor. Do I have a second? Kevin, still good with that? Okay. All those in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, say nay. It passes. Thank you. Okay. All right, we're going to go over to item number 5. What position classification for new strategic communication officer position? Ed, would you like to make?
yes, as the board knows, Greg Feller retired, and I want to start by saying how much we appreciate Greg's service to the community, not only with OWASA for many years, but before that with the town of Chapel Hill. And as is our practice, anytime we have a vacancy in the organization, we always pause to evaluate our current needs or projected needs in the future to make sure that any staffing decisions we make are still in alignment with the strategic direction of the organization. And that's what we did in this case, and what we determined. We think elevating the position, reclassing the position, and adding additional duties and responsibilities and seeking different qualifications would be in our best interest. And therefore, we're proposing to reclass the currently vacant public affairs administrator and reclass that to the new position of strategic communications officer. And I'll also say we are not totally wedded to that title. If you all have some suggestions in that regard, I think in a response to some questions, John, that you raised, I commented that public information officer was probably the most typical title used in government organizations for this position. And the more we looked into that, we were seeing more recent examples of some other titles. So that's what we're proposing the position be titled, but we also welcome your suggestions and feedback on that as well.
Any questions or comments from board members? Yinka?
So, thanks. So I just wanted to say thank you for putting the chart with the differences in qualifications. That sort of helped me narrow down what one does and what the new job responsibilities are going to be, along with experience needed. So that was helpful.
You're welcome. That was a good question that you asked earlier in our review process. Thank you.
Jeff?
I sort of enthusiastically support the idea. I think over my time in board, communication with the public has been a key item, and I think if we're upping our game in that area by bringing this position in, it's a positive step.
Any other discussion? If I could ask the board then to adopt the resolution on page 5.
I'm sorry?
Never mind, I'm sorry. Being funny and not doing a good job.
In general, support the recommendation. I do have some suggestions for the title. I personally don't think strategic needs to be in the title because I think, all of our positions at that level should be strategic. I don't think we talk about our strategic engineering, director of strategic engineering or strategic operations or anything like that. I do like the title of communications rather than information, public information, because I think it's more about engaging, and in that respect, I would say, manager, director, officer, whatever it would be, of communications and community relations, maybe as a positive way to speak to the value that we hope this position brings. Yes, sir.
Any reaction to that from the rest of the board?
One director or manager of communications and community relations. Yeah, I don't like that. To me, that sounds bureaucratic and maybe it aligns with what Ed said, is that's not the latest trend in titles.
John Moore?
What term would be most harmonious with other organization terms? Do we call people directors, officers, managers?
Yeah, I think in this case, officer might be a little better description because there's not a staff per se. Certainly the person would have very much a leadership role in working with other co-workers and consultants and peers and the like, but for this application, officer might be a little better description. And as I said, I know we're definitely open to community relations officer or communications and community engagement, or I guess it can be made too long, like John Kivanimi, wastewater treatment and biosolids recycling manager. It barely fits on his business card, right?
All right.
But
What's the pleasure of the board on this suggestion?
One way to answer that is if you were, or a colleague of yours was, interested in the job, does the title, kind of speak to how the job is structured and the duties and responsibilities? So, I do think community relations officer, does capture that, pretty well. Or if you wanted to make it a little longer, it could be communications and community relations officer. But
I personally would prefer connecting the two because
communications and community relations officer.
Yeah. Everybody good with that?
That's not an acronym that says something weird, is it?
Can you
we have drop, we don't want it to be goof or. Creedence Clearwater River, yeah. Awesome.
Oh,
yeah, that is outstanding.
Okay, do we have a motion to do the reclassification on 511?
I think the motion to, I'll make a motion to pass resolution on attachment 3 with the amendment of the change in title from strategic communications officer to communication and community relations officer. Anyway, so as amended with that title change, I move the motion.
Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Barbara. Motion made by Jeff. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those say nay. Again, who are against it? All right, it passes.
And I'll add, and I think I had it in the agenda item, that we'll prepare a recruitment plan and also an announcement for the job. And before that's posted, we'll email that to the board and give you an opportunity to provide comments. And, as you know, we certainly want to be on the same page, regarding our expectations for this position and what we're looking for. So we'll email that to the board probably early next week for your review and comment, and thanks very much for your support.
Thank you, Ed. All right, our next item is item number 6, analysis of new state laws impact on OWASA's service availability fee. Steve?
Thank you, sir. So you'll recall we talked, I don't know, a couple months ago about a state law that changed the way that organizations like OWASA calculate what we currently call service availability fees, but from this moment forward, tonight anyway, I'm going to refer to them as system development fees. That's what the law refers to it as and what other utilities refer to it as. So for consistency's sake, we're suggesting we begin to call it system development fee. The purpose of the discussion is to summarize the new statute's effect on OWASA's fees and to determine if there's additional information the board wants to see before making what I'm going to call a preliminary decision on a calculation method, which will make some more sense as we talk more further about it. A little background, these are fees that are charged for new connections to a OWASA system, not new accounts opening up, but new connections. There was no facility there, we put a meter in, and the fee is a recognition of the investments that over time have been made into the system. So the person that's hooking up is buying into something. The statute passed in July, I mentioned that before. The new statute permits three different methods for calculating system development fees, and it also specifies a process for making these changes, adopting them, and et cetera, and we'll go through that. So this is meant to be kind of a generic, really high-level description of how these fees are calculated. You first determine the value of the system. So you compute one for the water system, and you compute one for the wastewater system. So we're talking about, in the water side, we got a 20 million gallon per day water treatment plant, and we've got a distribution system of pipes that takes it out. So you start with what did those assets originally cost us. You make an adjustment for depreciation because they're not worth as much now because they've got some wear and tear on them, but then there's a replacement cost, so you factor that in as well. And then it's reduced by the amount of outstanding debt we have. So all that's saying is that's coming up with a dollar figure for what the water treatment plant and water distribution system value is. And we do the same thing for the wastewater side. So that results in an adjusted asset value that is then divided by, in the case of the water plant, the capacity. So let's say that the value was $100 million. The water plant's 20 million gallons per day. That results in a cost per gallon of $5 per gallon produced per day. That's just an example, but that's kind of close to what ours is, actually. And then that $5 in that example is multiplied by what the average gallons per day of a customer class has. So, you know, a customer in 1,000 square foot residence versus one that's in a 4,000 square foot residence. Again, this hopefully will make more sense as we continue to go through it. These are the three methods that the new law allows. I'm going to just go through them one at a time. The buy-in method, that asset base that I just described, includes existing assets only, what's already in place. The incremental or marginal cost, kind of the other side of that, it doesn't include existing assets, it includes assets that are going to have to be built to meet future expansion of the system. And then their combined method is a combination of those two. We and the consultants recommend OWASA using that incremental method because we don't expect much growth in the system. And so if we based our availability fees on what we're going to spend, that really wouldn't be a clear reflection of the condition of the system and what we're asking new customers to buy into. The last thing I'll mention on this slide is that we're not recommending that. So we're recommending either the buy-in or combine.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you for
I
clearing that.
thought you were saying incremental.
Oh, sorry about that. Yeah, we're recommending the one I struck out that we don't use. So two key other differences in these. I'm just going to focus from now on the buy-in and the combined methods. The buy-in, we can spend the money that we collect from the fees on any capital improvement project, essentially, whether it's expansion or rehab and replacement. If we chose the combined method, the fees that we collect from those can only be spent on new development. Probably not a huge deal for us, but it's a limitation nonetheless. So here's a comparison of our current system development fees with what they would be under the buy-in method and what they would be under the combined method. This is for residential properties, and you may remember that our fees are separated out into square footage for single-family residential homes, so a smaller home pays a lower fee than a larger home. And then this also includes multifamily individually metered, not multifamily master metered. And there's not a lot of these, but there are some. Yes.
So why did we add a new category?
Good question. Before I answer that, if I could, I wanted to just say, there's a lot of numbers on here. The ones that I would suggest you focus on are the change column, because what we're doing right now is comparing the two methods, buy-in versus combined. So for residential properties, the buy-in results in a reduction in the fees of about 1/3. The combined method also results in a reduction, but of about 1/5, 20 to 25%. We are recommending that we add a smaller house size as recognition for the kind of the tiny house movement. And it's at the end, and I'll show you it to you in a second about the analysis that we looked at to kind of justify that. But there is a natural break point at 800 in smaller houses using, on an average gallon per day basis, less than those in the 800, 1300. And if you can wait, so I don't have to shuffle through the slides, I'll show you that. Any questions on this? Yes, sir.
Did I understand you correctly that the combined, we could only spend those dollars on new development?
Expansion of the system.
Expansion of the system.
So, yes, sir.
Spell out what would be included in the expansion of the system. Would that
Sure.
be new pipelines,
The most common example would be if we want to increase the capacity of either the treatment plant. Way out in our CIP, we've got an expansion of the wastewater plant from what it is today to another 4 million gallons. And obviously, it's way out, that could change, but that's the easiest example.
Another one more down in the weeds than that. So if we were looking at, say, taking a line from an 8-inch water line to a 10-inch or a 12-inch, because we would see that somewhere in our future, could we, even though we're putting a pipe essentially in the same place, could we use it for activities like that?
That would be expansion, and
Okay.
we would incorporate that. If any developers paid for any part of that, that would come out of it. But yes, is the answer to your question.
John, did you have anything?
I don't know that I understand this completely, but I think if we use the combined method, we should make sure that this restriction on what you can use the money for is not going to cause a big problem. You know, it sounds like expanding the two plants is way, way out in the future, and so it might benefit us to have a revenue source that we could use for replacing lines, maintenance, and that sort of thing.
We agree. There's a little bit more information that I'll also mention that kind of justifies what we would recommend, but yes. Yes, sir.
John?
Stephen, I wonder if you could give us take us through an example. And how, what do we mean by assets that are, so if we've got a new development that is, fed by a water main that we're not upgrading, but yet we need to build a line that will serve that new development. Obviously, they're going to be trying to get a mix of different assets. Could you just kind of run through that example, how it would work?
Sure. So it's all about capacity. So the reservoirs exist now. That's the fact that we're running that extra line in there doesn't change that. That's part of the assets that currently exist that I mentioned before. If we are, most often what happens if we're running a line to a new development, the developer is paying for it. So it would factor into the net wouldn't factor in.
That's separate. That's separate from all of this discussion.
Effectively, yes. I mean,
Right, so we're only talking about the shared assets, like the past investment in the
Yeah,
reservoir and the,
you can think of it this way, any money that we spend on the system that we didn't get reimbursed for by developers.
And for, if I could add, for some of the pipeline, there may be further, downstream, the sewer interceptor has to be enlarged, so it can travel halfway through our service area, but ultimately, it triggers the need to increase the capacity of some of the backbone infrastructure, be it a water pipe or wastewater pipe. Yeah, I mean, as Stephen said, the developer has to put in whatever infrastructure to serve them, but there could be other impacts in the distribution collection system other than the capacities in the reservoirs and the two treatment plants.
So would we be able to use this money for any activities related to bringing the Quarry Reservoir online?
If we, yeah, on either one, I think we could. Bob, you correct me if you misspeak.
Do we have an idea of what, any ballpark idea of what we're looking at in like 2035 or 2040 for that?
No. This is something that we look at it periodically as a matter of operation. We just did this a year ago. But the new law requires it to be done every 5 years. So at least every 5 years, we're going to dump all this information again, and there'll be new CIP, and we can change the method at that point if we wanted to. Okay, so want to keep our focus on, what we're trying to decide is which of these methods do we want to use. So the bottom line is the buy-in methods is going to give new customers a larger break than the combined method. And that was one of the concerns that we heard. I don't remember how the board felt about this, but we heard from the Chapel Hill Town Council about an interest in lowering these fees for public housing and low-income properties and that sort of stuff, which we can't do. We've discussed that here at this level many times. So while this would apply to any customers, it certainly applies to those that the town council was concerned about. All right, so we just looked at residential. This is non-residential. The buy-in method would result in a 14% decrease, and the combined method would result in a 0.5% increase, so virtually stay the same. I'm tempted to explain why they're all the same percentages, but maybe that's not necessary. Okay. So I mentioned that was all for the water system. This is for the sewer system, and as it turns out, the buy-in method and the combined method result in the same result when it comes to analyzing the sewer assets. So either method results in a almost 30 or 40% reduction on the residential side, and on the non-residential side, it's a 20% reduction. Our recommendation is to use the buy-in method. Our development fees have always been a little bit on the high side compared to some of our neighbors, and with the interest in trying to make things more affordable, that's one of the reasons why we came down on that side. There's no difference in the two methods when it comes to sewer. There's a little bit better, greater reductions on the water side. The buy-in method provides the greatest flexibility in the use of proceeds that we just went through. I mentioned this, that it does address everyone, but includes the public housing and related and similar properties. And the difference in the budget impact between either method is, both methods are going to reduce our revenue. The difference in how much they reduce the revenue is, I don't think, significant enough to influence your decision. And just for some context, this is the FY18 budget, and we budgeted $1.4 million for system development fees in 2018. And best guess that ballpark either method would reduce that by a couple $100,000. It's really difficult to estimate, to pinpoint that, because you don't know what breakdown of different new development will come on board. And I'm going to switch gears a little bit, talk about how the process for getting this passed. We first select a calculation method. We have to create a report on the analysis that is then posted on our website for no less than 45 days, followed by a hearing. And when we post it on our website, we've got to provide a mechanism for the public to make comments, you know, a form or something. So once that 45-day passes, we consider those public comments, we make adjustments if we think that we need to, and then we hold a public hearing. And what we're suggesting is that we fold this into the existing process for budget and rate changes. And starting at the end and backing up, right, if we do it as we've done in prior years, the public hearing would be held on May 24th of 2018, and then we approve it a couple weeks later, and they go, and these new rates have to be in place by July 1st. You know, the other rates usually go into effect October 1st. So targeting May 24th is the public hearing, which would mean we would need to publish the report on our website no later than April 1st, and probably should be a little bit before then to give us time after the hearing, the exposure period closes, before the hearing, to make whatever adjustments we needed to make, which we're suggesting to be able to accomplish that you would decide buy-in or combined method no later than your meeting on February 8th. You do it anytime you want to, but that's kind of that seems to be a good place for us to get a decision, go away, put together the report, and do the rest of what we talked about. And I think that's, I want to show you the thing on the small houses. So this is a graph of only houses of 1,300 square feet or less. The bars represent the average gallons per day water use for the indicated size house. So the green along the bottom, you start on the left, that's a 400 square foot house. Over on the right, that's a 1,300 square foot house. And so you kind of see just from looking at it, there's a bit of a break between that 800 and 900, where everybody to the right, uses more, everybody to the left uses less. The average use for the one smaller than 800 square feet is about 61 gallons per day. The larger ones is about 90 gallons per day. But as you can also see, there's very few of the small 800 or less square foot houses. Well, there's 236 houses right now. But we have, this is one of the things that we learned from meeting with the town council too, is that there is some interest in development in what they're calling tiny house kind of movement. You're waving at me with the back of your hand.
Does the board have any questions?
Can you go back to the chart where you had, yeah, that one.
Okay.
Is there a reason why we are waiting till February 18th?
No, we're just sensitive to presenting something to you for the first time and asking you to decide, the same night. But good. And again, you're kind of deciding. It's a preliminary decision because you don't technically decide until after the public hearing. So we want to make that clear. But.
Yeah.
So just two questions. Just curious, does the statute define how you calculate the adjusted asset value, or is that a
It makes
decision?
reference to what the industry calls an M1 manual, which is an AWWA
All right,
big,
so it's
big book on this kind of thing.
standard guideline. It just
Yeah.
struck me during your discussion, there's going to be different ways of thinking of the value of your
Yeah.
system, but if you're following the guideline, that makes sense. And then, so the budget impact, the overall budget impact was about 300,000 for the buy-in method.
I'm guessing it's around
Ish.
200,000, give or take, for either choice.
Yeah, and so the difference between them is like 50,000 or something?
Yeah, or less.
Okay, so trivial difference. So, I mean, again, and I appreciate not asking us necessarily to decide right when we see things for the first time, but if the budget impact is effectively the same, the buy-in method is a little bit better for some of the customers, and if we went with a combined method, it would constrain our ability to use funds. It seems like a relatively obvious choice. I, for one, wouldn't be opposed to, in this instance, making it now if there was interest.
Okay, let's see if there's any other questions about it, John.
So, and this is related to Jeff's first question. So basically, if you adopt this minimum 25% of debt that has to be subtracted off or whatever by statute, then it's a formula, right? There's no discretion. You know, there's a prescribed method for these calculations.
There is, that 25% is, I mentioned that, you know, you figure the value, then you reduce the outstanding debt. You reduce the outstanding debt and you say, okay, was that reduction at least 25%? Yes or no? If it was, if it wasn't, in our case, I think, I don't remember which one wasn't, we had to actually increase it to get to 25%.
So you do it asset by asset.
Water versus sewer.
Okay, I got you. Yeah.
What's the big difference between how we calculate it now and this new approach? There's such a decrease.
Biggest difference is that 25% mandate that be reduced. That you reduce whatever the fee the thing you come up with by 25%. And that's a little bit more than what we had been reducing it for our outstanding debt.
Okay.
Joe? So the buy-in method is lower.
I should
Go ahead.
Add something to that question. It also, we were using the combined method before, which took into account some future spending, and the buy-in method is not.
Oh, okay.
Sorry,
No problem. So the buy-in is lower fees than the combined method, the new combined method. So ultimately, there's a revenue difference, and ultimately, we have to make it up. Is it disproportionately going to low-income customer or low-income housing to make, ultimately we got to make up that gap somehow. I'm wondering if we're truly, benefiting low-income housing if ultimately we're going to collect it in our monthly rates.
Yeah, I mean, if we ended up having to have a rate increase, I don't think that's going to be the case. I don't think this would lead to one in 19.
Ultimately,
yeah. Right. I mean, it depends on how we enact the rate increase, but if we do it like, we normally do, it just hits everybody the same, no matter what your level of income.
Right.
But I can't,
yeah, it wouldn't necessarily disadvantage low-income homeowner or owners of low-income housing.
I don't think so.
All right, thank you.
Any other questions? Any thoughts about going ahead proceeding tonight, or do you want to wait till February?
My only thought is, I just a principle that I don't like to proceed with a board member who's absent and not aware that we might proceed.
Okay. All right. So we'll bring it back in February. Heather?
Yes.
Go ahead.
I mean, yeah, February's fine. It gives us plenty of time to do what we need to do.
Or you can bring it back earlier since there's.
That's what I started to say, but then I stopped myself.
Bring it back when you're ready.
Okay.
Would the board be willing to perhaps have it as a consent item on a future agenda? So if if he doesn't, like, if we need to have more discussion, we can, but otherwise it can go on to our consent agenda?
I totally support that. And by the way, part of it is for the community to give input on it because they may not know we're deciding it tonight.
Yeah.
But I totally support consent agenda.
Okay. That sounds good. Any questions, Steve?
No, thank you.
All right. I think item number 7 now is review board work schedule. Are there any requests from board members or committees about things that you want to put on the calendar? John, I think you had some suggestions.
Yeah, again, just to state what I said at the beginning, the NERTS committee, the Natural Resources and Technical Services Committee, and staff would like to review the drought response operating protocol and bring potentially some recommendations to the board for a revision to that protocol.
Yes, it's on agenda page 7.2 and 3 are the items for the next meeting. On January 11th, you'll get an update about employee health and dental insurance from Ellen Tucker from Hillchesson and Woody. We will give you an overview of the ongoing project for the water wastewater treatment plant reliability risk assessment. And J.D. Solomon with our consulting firm CH2M will be presenting, and we also expect to have some other staff members to share some of their experiences with the work so far, which is going quite well. And then we'll be discussing FY19 budget calendar and assumptions, and it's tentative is in front of the next item, status of action items on communications during emergencies. The board agreed that we would wait until the county releases the report on the after action review from the partners. And Mary Tiger and I attended a meeting this week, and I think we're getting much closer to receiving that report. I just don't know yet if it'll be ready for the January 11th agenda, but it's on the way, so it's coming soon. Then we'll discuss the key performance indicators.
Kevin and John.
So this is actually about our schedule as opposed to this meeting. Because one of the things we have is the community engagement plan for forestry management, and that's just not listed on our June meeting. So I was just hoping we could go ahead and actually have that listed on the June agenda. Would that be possible?
Mary Dar, Director of Engineering and Planning. It shows up on the May 10th agenda.
Did I just miss it?
Yep, so move up from the
Oh,
mark.
okay, good.
Gotcha.
Got it. Yep.
Okay. John?
I see that on January 11, we have the item on here, discuss key performance indicators. And didn't we decide to put some special emphasis on the water line break issue, and in that we're having somewhat more breaks than our target performance indicators?
I don't recall. Certainly can discuss it, John.
I made that recommendation in an email before a board meeting that I missed, so I don't know if it came up in the board meeting or not, but that was, I made that by email. Is that what you're referring to, maybe?
Yeah, I may have imagined it, but I thought that as a board, we had decided that we would pick that as an emphasis area, and that we would, tackle that at an upcoming meeting. So maybe this is it.
I'm back again.
Okay, Mary?
If you go to the last page, 710, onto the pending key action, it's discussion includes focus on water main breaks on January 11th, so that is.
Okay. So, Todd Taylor recently sent us an email about sediment problems related to line breaks, which had very helpful information in it. And John Young has mentioned this in an email, but perhaps we could discuss that memo at the same time since it's related to line breaks. And there seemed to be at least some members of the board that wanted to go over that memo from Todd Taylor and be able to ask questions and make sure we understood it.
So any legal issues discussing that? Okay. All right. Can you add that, Ed? All right. We ready to go to the 25th of January?
And let me ask, would the board like to add the new system development piece to the consent agenda on January 11th or the January 25th meeting? Either gives us plenty of time. One possible advantage of having it on the January 25th meeting is if there is any interest or comments from the public, it is a televised meeting. It gives us a little more time to provide notice. I do think the elected officials would appreciate hearing, about this topic. I think it rises to that level, so that might be one reason to,
So you would send out this agenda item we have to the
well, of course, a lot of people receive the board meeting summary within a day or so, and we'll cover it then. But I'm also thinking, given the interest elected officials have expressed in the past about this, it's an opportunity perhaps to have you send a letter, to the mayors and the county chair, just calling their attention to the matter and the actions that the OWASA board is considering, and to invite their feedback if they choose. So, and of course, we can also get all of our duckies in a row to do that for the January 11th meeting if you prefer, but January 25th just might give us a little more time to prepare.
I think the 25th makes a lot of sense. My only reaction is, should we pull it off the consent agenda if, the idea is to give it a little bit more exposure? You'd make a brief, we wouldn't have to go in depth. Kevin?
But I think that we can have it, as long as they know what's going on and what we're planning on doing. I think having it on the consent agenda is fine. It just makes it so that we're following up with them to say, listen, what's going to happen? This is what the proposed act is, and it makes it so that the system development fees, that's new terminology, will be going down. And I actually don't think that they're going to want to comment, because if we go with the buy-in method, it's better for their purposes. And since that's where I'm pretty sure we're leaning, I don't think it's really, I don't think we'll get any comments, but it's a good way to.
Well, we can pull it off too.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Any other?
Yeah, the other main item, in addition to your quarterly financial report, is Mary Tiger will provide an update on our affordability outreach program to date and looking forward.
Does the board member have any comments or suggestions about the 12-month schedule? John?
Can I assume that we have the board's consent for that NERC's continuation? Yeah, good, okay. I knew we had your consent, but.
Sam getting pushy? Okay. No comments on the 12-month calendar, or you need a little bit? I think everybody is okay with the 12 months.
Just one thing just strikes you, looking at it on the table, we're pretty loaded up on our work sessions for agenda items, and we have fewer agenda items in the business community. Now, maybe those are meatier sessions, and I know we adjust going along, but, for example, the April 18th business meeting looks a little light. I'd be happy to listen to Stephen give the Q3 financial report for a good long while, but I assume we'll adjust as we go.
Okay, we can watch that. Hey, Ed, would you like to summarize the key actions tonight?
We will incorporate the board-approved changes in the resolution updating the pay administration guidelines, and we'll also email the board our revisions and seek your questions. As I understand it, correct me if I'm wrong, Bob, but no additional board action is needed unless we discover that we haven't captured the intent. We'll provide the board our recruitment plan and job announcement, and invite your feedback on our new communications and community engagement officer, our John Fogarty, Freedom's Clearwater Revival position. Thank you for that. We'll add the system development fee to the consent agenda for the January 25th board meeting, and we'll draft a communication from Bob to the mayors and the county chair, bringing this to their attention. And we'll be, as we plan, we'll be prepared to discuss water main breaks and sediment control at the January 11th work session. And as Barbara mentioned earlier, we'll be working to schedule the next Human Resource Committee meeting as well as the Natural Resources Service Committee meeting to discuss the drought response operating protocol.
Any comment? Okay, one question, I should ask this on the agenda item, but we were talking about the development service fees. That doesn't impact any of the tap-on fees or things of that nature, right?
That is the most significant fee a new customer pays when they connect.
The tap-on fee or the development fee?
The system development fee
Okay.
is the largest component of the fees associated with providing a new connection.
Okay, all right. All right, without objection, the board needs to convene in a closed session for two purposes, discussing potential litigation and discussing a personnel matter. All right, no objection seen, so we will go into closed session. We can just do that in here. And why don't we take a 5-minute break?
Well, you didn't say anything.